What is up, Packers fans? Happy game day. Welcome into an all-new episode of the Pack-A-Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can follow the podcast at Pack-A-Day Podcast. It is a game day. It's a preseason week 3, which is usually sometimes the least exciting of the preseason matchups, but certainly can't be worse than Packers-Broncos, right? It has to be better than that. I don't know about you, but I am certainly still looking forward to this one. And of course, because it is game day, we have to go through our Luigi's player to watch. Before we get there, got to show you this. Today we've got the ultra thin crust, mighty meaty Luigi's pizza. Excited to try this one out. I've obviously had the pepperoni and sausage one before, but I've not had it with the bacon yet. So really excited to try this one out. And I've got great news for those of you who are living in the Green Bay area. Hy-Vee in Green Bay. For the next month, you can get Luigi's thin crust pizza for $5.99. That is basically stealing. $5.99 for Luigi's thin crust pizza is about as good of a deal that you are going to get on anything ever, period, until the end of time. I'm serious. Their pizzas are delicious if you haven't tried them yet. So make sure to go over to Hy-Vee. Again, $5.99 for a thin crust pizza. And that, of course, brings us to our Luigi's player to watch for Packers Ravens. And in this one, I've got to go Kalin King. I actually thought about Kalin King last week. I decided against it, but I'm going to use him this week because I think this is a really interesting player to watch in this one. I believe wholeheartedly that Kalin King is going to make this team. I had him as a lock last week when I did my roster locks. Maybe that was a little over aggressive. There are 3 corners at this position for probably 2 spots. Kalin King, Corey Ballantyne, and then of course, Robert Rochelle. And I think everyone just kind of puts Robert Rochelle to the side. I think that's a little bit of a mistake because he's been really great on special teams and he's been good at corner too. Now, Kalin King, Corey Ballantyne can both play the slot, but Kalin King is unquestionably, to me, the most talented of these 3 corners and has the highest upside of these 3 corners. But he still needs to go out and show that he can be in some way useful. And I think he can be, but this is going to be a huge game for him on special teams. It's going to be a huge game for him on defense. We know he's likely to play a ton in the slot in this game. Does he get any outside corner reps to show what he can do there? Either way, these are sometimes the games, this third and final preseason game, that can make or break a potential roster decision for certain players. I think this is a huge opportunity for Kalin King, somebody who's going to get a ton of playing time. We've seen him make a lot of plays in camp so far. If he could go out there and cement his resume with a big interception or a big sack on a blitz, whatever it might be, that could go a long way in, I guess, defining whether or not he is on that final 53-man roster. And of course, special teams, another one that's going to be a huge factor for Kalin King. So wherever he is on the field, outside corner, slot corner, or if he's on, one of the special teams units, keep your eye on him because this is a huge game for him and his overall opportunity to make this team. And of course, make sure again to check out those Luigi's pizzas. All right, so here's everything that I'm going to be keeping an eye on in this game. It is a preseason game. I don't really care about the scoreboard unless it's, Broncos-esque from a week ago, right? You don't necessarily want it to be a 27-2, kind of shellacking again at the hands of your opponent. You want to show up a little bit more. You want to make it competitive. But if they lose, I don't really care. It's not really going to affect anything. There's a lot of other things, but I do want them to show more fight than they did against the Broncos a week ago. But the first thing I will be watching is who plays in this game. Do we get any starters for any period of time, even if it's just one series? And I would lean towards probably not, because it really seemed like Matt LaFleur was going to base whether or not he was going to play some of these players in the preseason game on whether or not they had a good practice on Thursday. And I thought they had a very good practice on Thursday against the Ravens. So I would guess that we don't see any of the starters, but if we do, I mean, obviously the priority starters, kind of the same players who were out a week ago against the Broncos. And if we do, I would expect it to be, one drive maybe on offense, one drive on defense, and then just sort of shut it down and get them out of there, because I do think the health is going to be a huge thing that you want to get out of this game. But I am intrigued to see not only who plays from a starting standpoint, but do any of these, injured sort of players, get into the fray? Does Jordan Morgan play in this game? If he does, that'd be a huge step for him and an opportunity maybe to still go out and win that starting right guard spot. I don't expect Edgerrin Cooper to play in this game, but man, if he could play even, 10, 15 snaps just to work off some of the rust and get out there, that would be huge for him. I don't expect it. I think they're going to be super cautious, but it would be, obviously nice to see him out there if he was able to. That's the first thing I'm going to be looking at, and we'll probably get that update, maybe 15 minutes before the game as to everyone that's not going to go, and maybe in the press box we're able to kind of keep track of it a little bit ahead of time. But overall, who plays and who doesn't is going to be a huge thing to watch early in this one. And then next, this is a little bit of a, I don't know, maybe a silly aside, but it's something that I think is important as well. This is a noon game. It's a noon Saturday game, so it's not complete apples to apples, but it's a noon game. The Packers have 6 of their first 8 games at noon, at least as currently scheduled. And after the Brazil game, the first Friday night game, they have 6 of their next 7, that are going to be taking place at noon. So I do think that this is sort of this nice dress rehearsal and to get the team in a rhythm of playing at noon, because it can be a little bit different. Green Bay, over the years is more accustomed to those 3:25 kickoffs, the 7 p.m. kickoffs, and the primetime opportunities. And we saw a little bit more, noon games last year as, I think the league didn't know exactly what to expect, or the networks, maybe better said, didn't know what to expect from Green Bay last year. But that's a lot of noon games to start the season. Again, 6 of your first 8 are going to be at noon. So I think just getting a little bit into a rhythm of playing at noon, I think will be a little bit of an important, part of the process for this team. Nothing that we can necessarily keep an eye on, but it's a nice thing to kind of keep in the back of your mind nonetheless. All right, so here's who to watch in this game, because as I mentioned, score mostly irrelevant, but what we are going to be really looking for are players that set themselves apart from the fringe of the roster to actually on the roster. I think there's a lot of spots that are up for grabs in this one. I think that you have, I would guess there's maybe 6 spots, and maybe even a little bit more that could theoretically still, be taken based on play in this game and, how they, did in practice this past week and everything like that. This is your final opportunity to add to your resume, to show what you're capable of, to, maybe add a skill set to show to, everyone, whether that is at special teams or maybe a pass protection as a running back or whatever it might be, to go and show what you are capable of. And those things can go a long way. We have seen players, make or break a team in that final preseason game. And some big performances can happen to get you a little bit more in the spotlight. So these are the players I'm going to be watching. And it's not a ton different from the list from last week, but I have narrowed it down a little bit more. I still want to watch this backup quarterback battle. Now, maybe they keep 3 quarterbacks, maybe they keep 2, maybe it's one or the other, but it's still one of them is in all likelihood, unless there's some sort of crazy trade or free agent signing gets made, one of them is going to have to be the backup. And while it still seems that is trending towards Sean Clifford, I don't think that's completely set in stone. And quite frankly, I kind of have liked how Michael Pratt has performed better than Sean Clifford so far. However, both of them are coming off great performances against the Ravens in the joint practice. Clifford had probably his best 2 throws of all of the offseason, both to Malik Heath, one big deep ball down the right sidelines, another one over the middle for a good chunk play on that one. He avoided turnovers, which has been a huge issue for him basically throughout the entirety of the offseason. And he took his team down the field in the 2-minute drill and went and got a, quote unquote game tying field goal in that situation. So it was a really nice day for him, but not to be outdone. Michael Pratt had a beautiful throw on a rollout to the right to Grant Dubose along the sidelines for about 25 yards. Really looked impressive in the red zone period, throwing multiple touchdown passes, and then also led his team down to a game-tying field goal in the 2-minute drill. So a really nice performance from both of them in the joint practices, but I would love to see them continue to grow, show what they're capable of, and one of these guys really go out and take that number 2 job and make it theirs. So I think that's going to be a key in this game. Next up is Emmanuel Wilson, who we've obviously talked about a lot this preseason, but he's going to get a huge opportunity in this one. Josh Jacobs likely not going to play or play very minimally, even if he does. A.J. Dillon out with the stinger, Marshawn Lloyd out with the hamstring injury. And you would expect that Emmanuel Wilson is going to be the guy that gets a ton of opportunity in this game. And we've talked about it. It's not so much what he can do as a runner from the running back portion, but what he can do as a pass protector and catching the ball out of the backfield. If he can show those 2 things, that would go a long way. Now, he might end up making the roster by default anyway. If Marshawn Lloyd and A.J. Dillon are not able to go, really if probably even one of them's not able to go to start the season, Emmanuel Wilson probably finds his way on this roster. But if both of them are able to recuperate and are able to go week 1, then Wilson either has to show that he is better than A.J. Dillon or that they should keep 4 running backs on the roster, which might be a really difficult ask based on the depth of this team. So either way, this should be a huge opportunity for Emmanuel Wilson. Wide receiver, I still expect Bo Melton to make this team, but I think Malik Heath and Grant Dubose are really fighting for that final roster spot. I think there's a world in which they could go with 5 receivers. I don't think there's a world in which they could go with 7. I think it's likely that they go with 6, but the difference between Dubose and Heath is, in my opinion, a complete toss-up at this moment. I've really liked some of the stuff that Dubose has done on special teams. I think Dubose has shown a little bit more of an upside, but Malik Heath came up with some huge catches from Sean Clifford this week. He continues to be Mr. Consistency. He's a good blocker. He can play some teams. He has a really good opportunity to make this team as well. And I honestly don't know. I mean, literally, I might have to flip a coin between those two if I'd make a 53-man roster decision right now. But guess what? Both of them have the opportunity to go out and have one more big game against the Ravens on Saturday. And I think that could go a long way in defining that position and who ultimately makes it as number 6, assuming they do keep 6 wide receivers. Offensive tackle, I have both of these guys on the 53 if I were picking it today, but I think these are really the 2 offensive linemen in totality that you need to keep an eye on, Kadeem Telford and Travis Glover. All right. You know that Rasheed Walker's going to make it, Elton Jenkins, Josh Myers, and then, of course, you've got Sean Ryan and Zach Tom. You've got Jordan Morgan and Jacob Monk as your 6th and 7th guys. And then, how many more guys do they sort of keep after that, I think is going to be the question. And I think Andre Dillard is going to be very much in that conversation, and he's not likely to play in this game. But if he would be number 8, then you would potentially have one more spot if you only want to keep 9 guys for either Telford or Glover, or maybe both of them can make it. But in order for both of them to make it, they're going to have to show their upside, because that could mean the difference between somebody like a Zane Anderson, a Brenton Cox, a Christian Welch, another corner, another wide receiver, etc., potentially making this team. So there's either going to be one spot for either Telford or Glover, unless they want to release Andre Dillard, or they're going to both have to fight to prove that they have more upside and should be kept over some of the other players at different positions on the roster. So either way, I think this is a huge game for both Travis Glover and Kadeem Telford. I do think both of them make it. In fact, I think if they maybe were going to release one, especially with the injury, maybe they release Andre Dillard, but he has played well at left tackle as of late. So these are really interesting discussions, but Telford and Glover can put their stamp on things by having a really nice performance against the Ravens. Next is Jonathan Ford. I still think Jonathan Ford is probably on the outside looking in. It's really difficult to try to find a way to keep 6 defensive tackles, but Ford's had a good camp. He's had a good preseason, and he's another guy that with a really big game against the Ravens could really make it difficult to try to release him. There's also a lot of teams that could probably use a 330-pound defensive tackle that looks really good throughout the course of preseason. And if he does go out and have a monster game, but Green Bay doesn't have a spot for him, I do think that there maybe could be a team that would call and say, hey, we'll offer you a conditional 7th round pick in 2025, 2026, something like that. Is it amazing, that you get a conditional 7th at some point? Maybe not, but is it better than nothing? Absolutely. So this could be a big performance for Jonathan Ford. It could be a big performance for the Packers as well, if they're able to maybe parlay his big performance into a future draft choice. Brenton Cox, Aaron Mosby. This is another one where I don't know they're going to be able to keep another defensive end with all the depth that they have at that position already, and some defensive tackles who can kick out to end like Carl Brooks and Colby Wooden if needed. But I think Brenton Cox and Aaron Mosby have both had good camps and good preseasons, and specifically Mosby in a camp. And then he had a good first preseason game, made a couple plays in the second preseason game. Cox, I thought, had a slower camp, but he's picked up as of late, and he's had a really nice preseason game in week 2. One of the few players that actually helped themselves in week 2 of the preseason for Green Bay. But I think both of these guys are in the conversation. I think they, first of all, have to beat out the other one. There's no way they both get kept on the roster. So which one it is the first step. And then do they even keep a 5th? That will go a long way in defining this as well. So huge games for both Mosby and for Brenton Cox. Christian Welch at linebacker, fantastic week against the Broncos, has been really good in camp, constantly making plays, tackles, core special teams guy, but keeping a 6th linebacker is really going to be difficult. He has to go out and show that he can be that guy, and special teams is going to be massive for him. We talked about Kalin King already, but Corey Ballantyne and Robert Rochelle, two spots for three guys, in my opinion. And I think Ballantyne is probably likely to make it with his versatility, slot, outside, and his ability to play teams and what he showed a season ago. Kalin King, a lot of upside, but Robert Rochelle has had a really nice camp, good preseason game a week ago, and he's, again, a core special teamer. So this is another really interesting discussion. All three of those guys need to go out and have big games in this one. Zane Anderson at safety. This week, he was on the first team kickoff unit and the first team kick return unit, and he's likely to be on a lot of the punt return and punt coverage units as well. So how he can, get involved in special teams, but also how he can play on teams and also how he can play on defense could go a long way. And Zane Anderson's been pretty good as well. He had that 3 interception day against Sean Clifford in minicamp, and then he's followed it up with a pretty good training camp as well. So this is another big opportunity for Zane Anderson, a guy who was on the 53 for the vast majority of last season. So that's a big game for him. And then Anders Carlson. And you might say, well, what about the other? Alex Hale is going to make it as an international pathway program as the 17th guy in the practice squad as a developmental kicker. All right. He's not in the conversation for making the actual kicker spot this year. And then to me, Greg Joseph has just had too poor of a camp to be considered anymore. To me, the conversation is now Anders Carlson or picking somebody up that's going to get cut or making a trade from some other team. Like that's it. It's Anders Carlson or the field that's out there. I don't think it's going to be Greg Joseph anymore. So Anders Carlson's the one to watch in this one. If he goes out and goes 3 for 3, including a 50-yarder or something, it's probably just his job. Like it's probably going to be him. But if he goes out and has an 0 for 3, things change very, very quickly. So this is a massive game for Anders Carlson. And just to sort of go on top of that, a huge game for special teams as well. And for all the guys, like, the majority of guys that we just talked about, right? Bo Melton, Grant DuBose, Malik Heath, Brenton Cox, Aaron Mosby, Christian Welch, Kalin King, Corey Ballantyne, Robert Rochelle, Zane Anderson, Anders Carlson, 11 guys there that are probably going to see some time on teams. And it could very much be the differentiator between who gets those final few spots and who doesn't. So how those guys go out and get opportunities on teams and perform on teams is going to go a long way in defining which of those guys actually makes the 53-man roster. And then, of course, there's going to be other guys to watch as well that aren't necessarily involved in a roster decision that you still want to go out and see have a good game. I would expect that LVN is going to get a decent amount of playing time in this one again to get him more reps and to hopefully get him a little bit more fine-tuned going into the season. He had a solid week 1, a bit of a rough week 2. Can he bounce back and show what he's capable of and try to put some moves together? There needs to be a better plan there for LVN. This is a good game for him to kind of get back on track, put that plan together, and show maybe what he can do going into the season. He's going to have a spot on this team, obviously, and he's going to have a rotational edge rusher role no matter what, but you want to get him playing at a certain level, ideally before the season starts. Carl Brooks has had a little bit of a quiet camp. He hasn't had any of these major, preseason splash plays or, any consistent, what I would call, disruptiveness in camp, but he still has shown the flashes here and there. I'd love to get him going in a positive direction and starting to take off as the season gets ready for week 1 against the Philadelphia Eagles. Sean Ryan, Jacob Monk, expected to probably play a decent amount along the offensive line. Want to see those guys go out and have good games. Tyron Hopper will likely play a ton at inside linebacker again. Would love to see what he can do. We talked about it to Jordan Morgan, Edgerrin Cooper. Do those guys get in this game? Probably not. But if they do, would love to see what they're capable of. Anthony Johnson Jr. will likely get a lot of playing time. Javon Bullard and Evan Williams will get likely some to start the game. So there's going to be a variety of players that are in this game that are going to have, roles week 1 against the Eagles. And the big thing here, obviously, is no injuries. But the other thing is, can they get some momentum going as they get ready to prepare for that first regular season game and hopefully can start the regular season off on the right foot. And last but not least, kind of spoiled it just a second ago, but it's injuries. And, there's going to be players, like I mentioned, that are playing in this game that are going to have roles in week 1. And you obviously want to get all those guys healthy. And let's just be clear. I want all of these guys to stay healthy, whether they make the team or not. I want them to be able to go on and make practice squads or get claimed by other teams if that's in the cards for them. Either way, I want everyone to stay healthy. But for those that are thinking like, well, it doesn't really necessarily matter if so-and-so gets hurt because they're not going to be on the team anyway, just remember that you then have to waive them injured. No team's likely going to claim them injured, which means they revert to injured reserve, which means you have to work out an injury settlement, and that injury settlement counts against your salary cap. So it's not just about, the guys who are here and make the team. Anyone that gets hurt and doesn't make the team is still a potential cost burden as well. And like I said, I'm not trying to look at it as just a numbers and dollars and cents thing. I want all these guys to stay healthy regardless and go out to have long, fruitful careers. But the big thing here is you don't want any injuries in this game. And then, of course, the guys that are going to be going out there in week one, you need to stay healthy because this is a game of attrition and you need as many guys to make it through the season as you possibly can to have a chance to be at your peak at the end of the year and playing at your best possible level. And if you have way too many injuries, even if it's a guy that might be 55th, 56th on the roster right now, that might be the guy that's 43rd, 42nd come, January, February. And he could have a major role on the team. So the healthier you can stay, regardless of who it is, the better. And that will certainly help Green Bay's depth along the way. All right, that is going to do it for me today. Just to kind of recap everything I'm going to be watching. Who plays? Can they show a little bit more fight against the Ravens than they did against the Broncos? Of course, all of those key roster players, some of the regulars that will be playing in this game that you want to get ramped up for week one. Special teams will go a long way in defining who could potentially get one of those last few roster spots. And then, of course, avoiding injuries as well. I will see you guys tomorrow. Shout out to our Hall of Fame and All-Pro members, Most Hated Minnesotan, PJ Wynn, John Wild, Shea Bradad, Brandon Paletta, Jennifer Wright, Boom Handle, Donald Lee, Lori Lord, Baby QB, David McCluskey, Donald Decker, Dan Miller, Alex Wong, Arnoldo Espinoza, Peter Ritaka, Caleb Cookster, SoCal Pack, Dan Guessford, and Love and Football. Until next time, though, and as always, enjoy the game and go Pack Go.